I wasn't supposed to be in that building. I wasn't even on the calendar for that site visit. Someone called out sick, and corporate needed a warm body to check on a struggling department. I drew the short straw. I had no idea walking through those glass doors would rip open a part of my life I had duct-taped shut for years. The elevator dinged. I stepped in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, skimming quarterly projections. My reflection stared back from the silver paneling, tired eyes, tie too tight, hair thinning in ways I didn't like to admit. Whatever. I was there to audit and move on. But then the elevator stopped on the 7th floor. The doors opened. She walked in. Red folder, black heels, messy bun, overly confident stride, like the world was her runway. I didn't recognize her at first. Not really. Her back was to me, her perfume subtle but familiar in the worst way. Then she turned slightly to adjust her badge. And I swear on everything, my heart dropped like it forgot how to beat. Tessa, my ex-wife. In my elevator. In my building. What the hell? She didn't see me. Not at first. She was too busy adjusting her blazer. Typical. Always cared more about how things looked than how they felt. I didn't say a word. I just stared. And in those 15 seconds of silence, everything came flooding back. The lies, the empty bed, the voicemail she never returned, the way she packed up her life like I was a mistake to erase. And now she was here. The elevator kept climbing. Floor 8. Floor 9. I watched her shift her weight, not even realizing she was being watched. I wanted to speak, but what do you say to someone who demolished you and never looked back? Floor 10. The doors slid open. She stepped out, toward the department I was now overseeing. She still hadn't seen me. I let the doors close. My hand trembled around the coffee cup. I checked the file again. New marketing lead. Tessa Willoughby. I hadn't read her name closely the first time. I never imagined this. I took the stairs back down. Needed air. Needed space. I wasn't ready. But here's the thing. She was. She had no idea that the division she just joined was under new leadership. No idea that her new boss, the man she'd report to, the man who held her evaluations, approvals, and advancement in his hands, was the same boring, safe, spineless husband she'd left for a guy named Ron. She had no idea that Ron cheated on her 6 months later with someone from legal. She had no idea I'd built something better, not to impress anyone, but because I had nothing left to lose. But she was about to find out. Because in 45 minutes, I had a leadership briefing on her floor. And I planned to introduce myself, officially. And this time, I wouldn't be the one going pale. I took the long hallway slowly, letting my shoes echo just enough to signal presence, but not enough to give away who I was. I didn't want to sneak up on her. I wanted her to see me before she heard me. I wanted the image to hit her first. The face she probably thought she'd never have to deal with again. The man she walked out on like an expired lease, now wearing the badge of her superior. The team was already gathering in the small glass-walled conference room at the far end of the floor. I scanned the room through the frosted strip across the middle of the glass. There she was, sitting with one leg crossed over the other, nodding absently as someone from HR introduced the department changes. She looked comfortable, relaxed, like this was just another Monday morning with a free pastry and a quarterly meeting. My name hadn't been mentioned yet. Perfect. I pushed open the door and stepped in. The air shifted immediately. She looked up, expecting a stranger. What she got was a ghost from a life she set on fire and never looked back at. Her hand froze halfway through a sip of coffee. Her eyes widened, not just in surprise, but confusion. Like her brain needed an extra second to load. "Morning," I said calmly. "Dwight Parker, newly appointed Director of Strategy and Oversight. I'll be working closely with each department for the next few months, starting here." Her face was blank, like she was rebooting. HR finished the introduction with the kind of awkward smile people give when they feel tension but don't understand it yet. I turned to the group, gave the usual canned speech about process audits, goal alignment, blah blah blah. I couldn't even hear myself. I was too focused on her. Watching her eyes avoid mine. Watching her clutch her pen too tightly. Watching the color drain from her face by the second. When the meeting ended, people stood and scattered with the usual polite chatter. Tessa tried to blend into the crowd. Tried to grab her folder and disappear before I could say anything. But I wasn't going to let her run this time. "Tessa," I said, and the whole room went quiet like someone hit mute on a remote. She stopped, back still turned. "I think we should talk before the end of the day. Privately." She turned slowly, like turning to face a sniper. Her voice came out soft, brittle, a sharp contrast to the woman who used to laugh in my face during arguments. Dwight, I didn't know you were in charge. I finished for her, expression blank. She nodded. Her mouth opened to say something else, maybe to lie, maybe to apologize, maybe to spin something like she always did, but I wasn't interested in whatever performance she was rehearsing in her head. I'll send an invite. Don't be late. That was all I said before walking past her, out of the room, and down the hall like she didn't once hold my heart hostage for a decade. What she didn't know was that I had everything. I knew why she really left. I knew about the money she funneled out of our joint account to fund weekends with Ron. I knew about the rental apartment she secretly leased before she even asked for space. I even knew about the resignation letter she submitted to another company last month when she thought she was getting an offer from them, one that fell through at the last minute. And now, here she was, working for me. Not just awkwardly, not coincidentally, working directly beneath me in a division I controlled entirely. And the best part? I didn't have to do anything cruel. I didn't have to fire her. I didn't need revenge. I just needed her to understand that the man she discarded like a dull pencil had become the one writing her paycheck. And if you think that shook her, wait until you hear what she said when we sat down in my office, and she realized I wasn't angry. I was indifferent. I sent the meeting invite for 3:15 p.m. sharp. Just 15 minutes after the team's second round of orientation wrapped. Not too early for her to feel safe, not too late for her to convince herself she could dodge it. I kept the titles simple: follow-up discussion, transition, and department strategy. No drama. Just the right kind of vague that forces a person to sweat all day in anticipation. I wanted her to sit with it. Let the silence grow teeth. When she walked into my office, she had already rehearsed something. Her smile was carefully constructed, the kind of expression you make when you want to seem calm but your knees are begging to run. I didn't stand. I didn't offer her coffee. I just gestured at the seat across from me and said, "Close the door." She hesitated, then did as I asked. I didn't speak for a moment. I wanted her to feel how sterile the room was. Nothing personal on the desk. Just reports, a laptop, and her personnel file flipped shut but perfectly centered between us like a loaded weapon. "So," I said finally, keeping my voice casual, "I assume you realized today wasn't a coincidence." She nodded slowly. Yeah, I just didn't think that I'd still exist. I finished for her. Or that I'd show up in a position that matters. Her eyes dropped. That's not fair. I tilted my head slightly. Oh, you want fair now? She leaned forward, elbows tight against her sides, voice quiet but urgent, like we were still in our kitchen at home and not in a glass office on the 12th floor of a building with my name on half the documentation systems. "Dwight, I didn't know you'd be here. I swear. If I had, you wouldn't have taken the job," I said, "or you would have taken it faster, hoping I wouldn't recognize the name?" That hit her. I saw it in her throat, the swallow that caught halfway. She looked away, jaw flexing, as if trying to hold back the first honest thing she'd said in years. "I messed up," she whispered finally. I raised an eyebrow. "You'll have to narrow that down." She blinked quickly, tears starting to form. And for a split second, the part of me that used to beg her to come home, that used to stay awake hoping for one more conversation, almost flinched. But I didn't move. I didn't soften. I just watched. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she said, and my stomach churned. "I left because I thought I could do better." I sat very still. "And did you?" I asked. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Ron lasted 6 months. He wasn't who I thought he was. He lied. Cheated on me with someone from procurement, if you can believe it." "Oh, I can believe it," I said flatly. She looked at me then, and her voice cracked. "I thought you were boring, Dwight. Predictable. Too safe. But now I know that's what loyalty looks like. That's what love looks like." I leaned back in my chair. "You left a man who made you breakfast every morning for a guy who took calls during dinner. You traded stability for excitement, and it ate you alive." She wiped her cheek. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I needed to say it." I nodded slowly. "Then I've heard it. And that's all it is, something you needed to say." There was silence. Heavy, dense. I could almost hear her pride cracking under the weight of the moment. "I can resign," she said quietly. "If that's easier for you." "No," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "You'll stay. You'll do your job. And you'll report to me like everyone else. Because you don't get to run again. You don't get to escape what you made." Her face turned pale again, but this time it wasn't surprise. It was humiliation. "You know," I added as she stood, Clearly looking for an exit from both the room and the conversation. You always said I was too quiet, too soft, that I didn't know how to take control. She paused. Now you do. She opened the door and left without another word. And as I turned back to my reports, one thing became clear to me. The best revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was sitting in the chair she thought she'd always be above, looking her in the eye and choosing not to crumble. But trust me, this wasn't the end. Because what I didn't expect was that she'd start showing up early, volunteering for projects. And one night, I caught her doing something in the office that nearly made me fall out of my chair. 3 days passed. She didn't resign, didn't request a transfer. She showed up every day like clockwork, wore modest clothes, kept her head down, took notes during meetings, and even brought donuts for the department on Friday, glazed, powdered, jelly-filled, like she was trying to fill the silence with sugar. Everyone else thought she was just being friendly, productive, professional. But I saw what she was doing. It wasn't remorse. It was a rewrite. Tessa was trying to curate a new version of herself, not for her coworkers, and definitely not for the company. For me, the same woman who once told me, "You suck the thrill out of everything," was now saying things like, "You have such vision, Dwight," in team huddles and laughing a little too hard when I made a dry joke. She wanted to reset the narrative, and she thought a few polite nods and revised behavior would let her re-enter the storyline without consequence. I wasn't falling for it. Not again. But then something happened. Something that caught me off guard. It was late Thursday evening, around 8:45 p.m. I'd stayed late working on vendor restructuring, a mind-numbing process that required focus and, unfortunately, physical signatures. I was printing off the final set of forms when I heard soft footsteps just outside my office. I assumed it was security doing rounds, but then I heard the copier. A quiet hum. Paper sliding. Someone else was here. Curious, I stepped into the hallway. There she was. Tessa stood alone at the break room table, illuminated by the dim overhead light, her back to me. She wasn't making coffee or grabbing her purse. She was sitting at the table, staring down at a single sheet of paper, her own employee review draft. I hadn't even handed it out yet. She must have found the template in the internal files. What she was doing was writing. Not notes. Not edits. A speech. She had her phone beside her, recording audio. I crept closer, silently, staying out of view behind the corner. And I listened. "I know I made mistakes," she said softly into the phone. "And maybe he'll never forgive me." But I was scared. I didn't leave Dwight because he was weak. I left because he was strong in a way that terrified me, the kind of man who wouldn't break when I did. I thought I needed chaos to feel alive. Turns out, chaos just makes you lonely. She paused. "I don't know if he hears any of this, but I have to try. I have to try before I become the kind of person who just lets regret rot her from the inside." I stepped back before she could hear me. Quietly, carefully, I returned to my office and closed the door like nothing happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I forgave her, not even close, but because, for the first time in years, I saw her without the performance. No smirk. No manipulation. Just a woman sitting in a dark break room trying to stitch together the torn edges of a life she shredded. But here's the kicker. The next morning, she pretended nothing happened. Gave me a polite, "Good morning, Dwight," and went about her business like she hadn't bared her soul to a phone 13 hours prior. I never confronted her. Not yet. But it changed something in me. Not sympathy. Not hope. Curiosity. Because the woman who once ghosted me emotionally for half a year was now folding my name into quiet confessions when no one was watching. And I needed to know why. So I ran a background check. Not the official HR kind. Something deeper. I wanted to see what happened in those years after she left, not the Instagram vacation pics, but the truth behind the curtain. What I found. That's where the story really twists. I don't know what exactly drove me to do it. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the unresolved ache of being left without explanation, discarded like a cheap souvenir from a vacation neither of us ever took. Or maybe it was that strange, painful kind of curiosity that comes when the person who shattered your life suddenly reappears and starts acting like they're the one trying to put it back together. Whatever it was, I opened my laptop that weekend and started digging. At first, it was innocent. I Googled her name, not just the usual social media gloss, but forums, business sites, old press releases. I knew she'd had a brief stint in PR consulting after Ron dumped her, but what I didn't know was how short that stint had been. Less than 4 months. The company folded, but the story was more complicated than that. I found a blog buried under layers of SEO neglect, where a former intern of that firm wrote a passive-aggressive post about leadership failures in boutique branding agencies. One section stood out. Some people mistake charisma for competence. They talk well in meetings, but fall apart in crises, especially when they let personal entanglements walk through the front door and dictate office culture. I've never seen someone crash a company faster than our creative lead in 2021. She let her personal drama pollute every department. We didn't need a consultant. We needed a therapist. No name, but it didn't need one. The timeline matched Tessa's consulting gig to the day. Her LinkedIn had quietly skipped over that job entirely. Like it never happened. Like she had a blank year of nothing. But that wasn't all. I found court documents, nothing criminal, but civil disputes. One of them caught my breath. A landlord case in Silver Lake. Non-payment of rent. Filed by the same building where Tessa and Ron reportedly moved in together after she left me. Apparently, he stopped covering her share. And she couldn't keep up. She'd been evicted. Tessa, the woman who once rolled her eyes when I used coupons at the grocery store, had been evicted from a one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a broken balcony heater. She'd fallen hard. And quietly. And she'd done everything she could to sweep the pieces into a drawer and pretend it never happened. I sat back in my chair, hands cold. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Vindicated? Angry? Sad? I guess I just felt exhausted. It was like finding out the dragon that burned down your home had turned into a lizard hiding under a rock, pretending it never breathed fire. And still, she came into work on Monday morning with her blazer buttoned and her smile ready, sitting 2 chairs down in the weekly strategy meeting like she wasn't holding 1,000 unspoken truths behind those calm eyes. That week, she volunteered to lead a rebranding pitch for one of our legacy clients. The team was surprised. She hadn't touched a client deck yet, but now she was stepping forward like she was ready to prove something. I let her quietly approve the assignment. I wanted to see how far she'd go, whether this was about redemption or illusion. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. We flew out to meet the client in person, something I usually avoided but made an exception for this time. I sat in the back of the room, behind the rows of glassy-eyed executives, arms crossed, watching. And then it happened. Halfway through the presentation, as she was mid-sentence, pulling up the next slide, her voice caught. She froze. Eyes locked on the screen. The projector had glitched, briefly showing the wrong file. It was a document from her old consulting firm, a sample deck with her name on it and a timestamp that directly contradicted the version she'd submitted to our company. She had copied the structure, recycled the content, even reused the taglines. Plagiarized. She hadn't built this pitch from scratch. She'd repackaged something she did 3 years ago, something that didn't even work back then. And now she was trying to pass it off like it was bold, new, cutting-edge strategy. I watched her stumble, stammer, try to recover. The client looked confused. My team glanced at each other. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth had revealed itself, and she knew it. You could see it in her hands as they trembled on the clicker. After the meeting, she didn't come back to the hotel with the team. Said she needed air. Said she'd catch a later flight. But I already knew she wasn't going back to her room. She was trying to disappear again, vanish before the fallout hit. But this time, I wasn't going to let her run. Because I wasn't the one who should feel small anymore. And if she thought she could rewrite history without facing the author, she was wrong. By the time I landed back in Chicago Saturday morning, I already knew she wasn't on the return flight. One of the junior associates said she'd missed it due to a sudden migraine. That was Tessa's go-to cover when life got too sharp for her to handle. I'd heard it before. First when she forgot our 3rd anniversary dinner. Later when I discovered a suspicious Uber charge that took her to Ron's apartment on a Wednesday afternoon. Migraines. Always migraines. I didn't text her. Didn't call. I let the silence breathe. I wanted her to decide which door she'd walk through next. Accountability or escape. Monday came, and to everyone's mild surprise, she showed up. On time. Hair done, eyes red, but makeup doing its best to cover the failure that had unfolded in that boardroom. She didn't say a word during the first half of the meeting. She didn't need to. Her failure was the elephant now pacing between the chairs. She knew I had seen it. And worse, she knew I understood what it meant. That her facade had cracked. That the woman who once mocked me for playing life too safe had now gambled with a lie and lost everything. When the meeting ended, I dismissed the team but held her back with 2 words. My office. She followed quietly. No dramatics. No protests. just the sound of her heels tapping against a floor that didn't quite feel like hers anymore. I closed the door, walked to my desk, and dropped a manila folder onto the surface. "That's everything I found in under 4 hours," I said. "The consulting firm fallout, the civil cases, the eviction, and now this presentation you tried to pass off as new work." Her eyes flicked to the folder, then to me. "You've been digging through my past?" "You handed me a shovel when you lied on company time," I replied. "I just used it." She didn't speak, just stood there, jaw tight, like if she moved, the whole building might collapse around her. "I'm not firing you," I continued, and she blinked. "Once. Twice." "You're not." "No," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You want to know why?" She nodded slowly. "Because that would make it too easy for you to become the victim again. You'd leave, cry to some new set of people about how I was cruel, how I used my position to punish you. You'd twist the story, just like you did in our marriage. But this time, I'm keeping the record straight." A long silence followed. One I didn't interrupt. "I thought I could handle it," she whispered eventually. "Being here, seeing you again. I thought I could be different." "You're not," I said flatly. "You're just more careful now." She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. "I didn't come back to hurt you, Dwight." "You already did," I said. "Years ago. That part's over." Then I slid a new piece of paper across the desk. She looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "An internal transition request. I'm moving you to a lower impact role. Lateral move. No leadership. No direct reports. No client-facing tasks. You'll have to rebuild trust. From scratch." Her face went pale. "That's humiliating," she said, voice shaking. "It's earned," I replied. "And better than termination." She hesitated. "You're doing this to watch me squirm." "No," I said. "I'm doing this so you can't run again. You'll face every person in that building and know you don't get to skip the consequences this time." She stared at the paper, then slowly signed it. As she handed the pen back, she asked something I didn't expect. "Do you still hate me?" I looked at her for a long time. Not with anger, just with exhaustion. "No," I said finally. "That would mean you still mattered that much." She left without another word. Later that night, I found myself back at the office, alone, lights low, sipping burnt coffee from the vending machine. I pulled up the Teams Cloud folder, half expecting to find that she hadn't started on her new assignment. But instead, there was something else. A recording. Untitled. No description. Just a timestamp from 2:16 a.m. I clicked it. Her voice played through the speakers, soft, worn, honest in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I'm not proud of who I've been. I thought pain made me strong. But all it did was make me cruel. I keep waiting for Dwight to yell, to lose it, to humiliate me. But he never does. And somehow, that makes everything worse. Because it means he's not the same man I left. He's stronger now. And I don't even know who I am anymore." I paused the recording. And for the first time since this whole disaster restarted, I felt something different. Pity. Because no matter how many stories she tried to spin, no matter how many rooms she walked into pretending to be whole, the truth was, she was still that same broken soul sitting in a dark break room, trying to sound like she had answers. And I wasn't going to fix her. Not again. It had been 10 days since the reassignment. 10 days of silence, of awkward hallway glances, of half nods in elevators and emails that were short, formal, and lined with unspoken tension. Tessa had taken the new role without protest. I expected bitterness, resistance, even the usual sharp-edged sarcasm she once used like a shield. But instead, she showed up. Every morning. Head down, notes in hand, quietly executing her new responsibilities. She was efficient, quiet, hollow. For once, she wasn't trying to impress anyone or manipulate the room. It felt like she was trying to shrink into the background, like she didn't want to be noticed at all. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon, that quiet shattered. It started with a knock. Not on my door. On the glass wall beside it. A firm rap, the kind made by someone who doesn't wait to be invited. I looked up, expecting one of my junior managers. Instead, I saw a man. Late 40s. Expensive blazer. Cufflinks that didn't belong in a corporate office, more like a courtroom. He stepped in without hesitation, ignoring protocol entirely. "Dwight Parker?" he asked, extending a hand. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "My name is Harrison Graves. I represent a private equity firm that recently acquired a stake in this company. I'm also here on behalf of a potential liability, one I believe you're familiar with." I stared at him. He smiled thinly. Tessa Willoughby. I didn't say anything. I'd like to discuss a few legal vulnerabilities stemming from her past consulting work, specifically a non-disclosure breach and an intellectual property dispute with a former partner. I believe some of the materials she used in your recent pitch may have been under litigation. My heart slowed. She had brought that mess here. I've already contacted legal, he added. But I came to you directly because I believe you may have insight into her professional behavior and her personal patterns. There it was. The polite way of saying, we know she's a problem, and you've been burned before. Help us bury her. I leaned back slowly. And what exactly are you asking from me? Anything that might expedite her removal, he said. We'd prefer this matter be handled internally. Quietly. I didn't answer. I just looked down at the manila folder on my desk, the same one that had held the first pile of evidence I'd gathered. It was still there, untouched. I hadn't needed to reopen it. Until now. She hasn't made any trouble, I said carefully. She's accepted her reassignment and completed everything she's been given. I understand, Graves said smoothly. But we both know people like her rarely stay quiet for long. And liability rarely announces itself before it strikes. He left his card and walked out without shaking my hand again. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the look in her eyes when she signed that reassignment form. Not defiance, not anger, but surrender. Like someone who had finally realized the game was over. And now, someone else wanted to throw her off the board completely. The next morning, I called her in. She looked thinner than usual. Tired. The kind of tired you don't fix with sleep, the kind that wraps around your bones. I had a visitor yesterday, I said flatly. An attorney. Said he's representing former partners from your consulting days. Something about litigation. NDAs. IP theft. Her face drained of color. I continued. He asked for help removing you. Quietly. Legally. She sat down without being asked. Hands in her lap. Breathing slow and deliberate, like she was fighting the urge to break. I knew it would follow me, she whispered. I just didn't think it would find me here. What happened, Tessa? She looked at me. Really looked. And for once, I saw something unfiltered. I didn't just fail that firm, she said. I destroyed it. I got into a partnership with someone who promised would build a creative empire. He was charming, aggressive, said all the right things. And I fell for it. Romantically, financially. He put everything under my name. Every client contract. Every licensing deal. Said it was just paperwork. I didn't ask questions. And when it all collapsed, he disappeared, and I was holding the bomb. And the pitch he reused? It was his, she said. He claimed it was ours. But apparently, he lifted most of it from a firm he used to work at. I didn't know. Not until they filed against us months later. I thought it was behind me. It's not, I said. And now it's at my desk. Tessa's shoulders fell. I'll resign, she said. Today. No fuss. You don't need this. I studied her. Every part of me wanted to say yes. Let her leave. Let her take her mess elsewhere. After everything she did, she didn't deserve another ounce of mercy. But then something unexpected came out of my mouth. No. She blinked. What? You don't get to run again. You'll stay. You'll meet with legal. You'll sign whatever compliance documents they need. You'll do the work to fix this. Because if you walk out now, you'll be a liability for someone else 6 months from now. And I'm done watching you escape consequences. She looked like she might cry. But she didn't. She nodded. And for the first time, I believed her. This wasn't the same woman who'd walked out on me with a smirk and a suitcase. This was someone still haunted by every room she ever ran from. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally willing to stand still. The following weeks were tense, but quiet. Legal handled the inquiries with sharp precision, and Tessa, for once, cooperated without resistance. She came in early, stayed late, signed every compliance document, clarified every questionable slide and email thread. She didn't deflect, didn't dramatize, didn't ask for protection. She did what she should have done years ago, owned it. I watched from a distance. She didn't speak to me much outside of what was necessary. There were no lingering stares, no passive-aggressive remarks, no emotional overtures. Just the hollow rhythm of accountability. And in a way, it was the most respectful she had ever been to me. Because this time, she wasn't trying to manipulate the ending. She was finally letting it close. One Friday afternoon, about 2 months after Graves had first walked into my office, I found an envelope on my desk. No note. Just my name on the front in her handwriting. Inside were 3 things. A typed resignation letter, dated 2 weeks from that day. A personal check, repaying half of the money she had withdrawn from our joint account years ago. And a photo one I had forgotten existed. The two of us, in front of our first apartment, arms around each other, smiling like the world hadn't happened yet. On the back of the photo, she had written in ink, "You weren't safe. You were solid. Thank you for becoming the man I always needed." Even if I wasn't the one who deserved him. I sat with that for a long time. Later that evening, I found her in the break room, alone, rinsing out her coffee mug. "You could have emailed the letter," I said. She looked up, calm. "I needed you to see it." "You didn't have to send the check," I added. "I did," she said. "I took too much. Time. Money. Grace." That was the last piece. There was a long pause. Not heavy. Just still. "What are you going to do next?" I asked. She gave a faint smile. "Start over, but for real this time. I've already accepted a role with a nonprofit in Milwaukee. Communication support. Modest, quiet, fitting." I nodded. "Sounds like something you can grow in." She looked at me for a long second, then said, "I'm sorry, Dwight. Not for how things ended, but for not ending them right. You were always enough. I just didn't know how to value what didn't shout for my attention." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She gathered her things, and before leaving the room, she turned back one last time. "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have," she said. "I didn't need to," I replied. "You rebuilt yourself." And then she walked out. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. Just peacefully. A few weeks later, her name disappeared from our system. I didn't look her up. I didn't need to. Because closure doesn't always come with doors slamming or justice served. Sometimes, it arrives as quiet as a file closing on your desk. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because she was gone, but because I finally understood that healing isn't about getting even. It's about being able to move forward, without looking back. And I did.